With the crossing of the Thames behind him and the capture of the stronghold marking a major turning point, Caesar prepared to consolidate his gains in Britain. The campaign had been grueling, with Caesar's forces enduring difficult conditions and intense resistance from the Britons. Yet the Romans had managed to secure a foothold, pushing deeper into British territory. Caesar understood that his continued success depended on establishing alliances with local tribes, stabilizing supply lines, and minimizing further conflict to avoid heavy casualties. Even with the fall of Cassivellaunus' stronghold, Britain remained a challenging frontier, and Caesar's legions were still vulnerable. Caesar knew the importance of diplomacy in consolidating his victories. He sought out chieftains of various tribes, offering terms that would ensure their allegiance without forcing Rome to commit to a lengthy occupation. The first to respond were those who had been on the periphery of the conflict, tribes that had either stayed neutral or provided minimal support to Cassivellaunus. These leaders saw the advantage of cooperation with Rome, hoping it would spare their lands from further devastation. They agreed to Caesar's terms, pledging hostages and a tribute that would serve as a mark of submission to the Roman Empire. Caesar's calculated diplomacy succeeded in securing a series of alliances that would stabilize his position and prevent further uprisings. Cassivellaunus, although defeated, remained a prominent leader among the Britons. Caesar understood that a ruler as influential as Cassivellaunus could either be an ongoing threat or a valuable ally. The chieftain's resistance had earned him respect among his people, and Caesar recognized the advantage of turning this formidable opponent into an ally. Rather than subjugating him fully, Caesar sought to reach an understanding. He offered Cassivellaunus an honorable peace, one that allowed him to maintain his status in exchange for a yearly tribute and a pledge to remain loyal to Rome. Cassivellaunus, seeing the benefits of an alliance and the futility of continued resistance, accepted the terms. His decision was as much a strategic retreat as a submission, allowing him to preserve his people's autonomy while acknowledging Roman superiority. With a network of alliances forming around him, Caesar turned his attention to securing a reliable supply chain. The rough British terrain and unpredictable weather posed significant challenges, making it difficult for the Romans to rely on the provisions they had brought with them. Caesar dispatched units to forage and gather supplies from local settlements, but he instructed his soldiers to treat the local populations with respect, knowing that excessive pillaging could turn his new allies into enemies. This careful management of resources helped maintain relative stability in the occupied territories, allowing Caesar's forces to remain well-provisioned without alienating the local tribes. As Caesar solidified his hold over the region, the Britons watched cautiously. Although many chieftains had submitted to Roman rule, resentment simmered beneath the surface. Caesar's campaign had brought destruction and disruption to their lands, and the idea of paying tribute to a foreign power was deeply distasteful to the fiercely independent Britons. Cassivellaunus and other leaders who had submitted were now in the difficult position of balancing their loyalty to Rome with their responsibilities to their people. They maintained a delicate peace, knowing that open rebellion would lead to brutal reprisals, but also harboring a deep desire for future independence. Caesar's own writings reveal his satisfaction with the campaign's outcome. He saw his accomplishments in Britain as a testament to Roman strength and resilience, framing his conquests as a victory of civilization over barbarism. Yet he was aware of the limitations of his success. Britain remained a distant and challenging territory, and Caesar had no intention of maintaining a prolonged occupation. His victory, he knew, was not one of conquest, but of influence. By securing allegiance through tribute and hostages, Caesar achieved his goal of extending Rome's reach without overextending its resources. As the summer drew to a close, Caesar prepared to return to Gaul. His campaign had fulfilled its purpose, demonstrating Roman might and securing the loyalty of Britain's tribes through diplomacy and force. However, his departure was not without a sense of caution. He left behind a legacy of Roman influence, but he knew that the Britons, while currently subdued, would not remain so indefinitely. Caesar ordered his forces to prepare for departure, ensuring that the withdrawal would be orderly and secure. The legions, battle-worn and eager for the familiar terrain of Gaul, began their march back to the coast. The journey to the coast was fraught with challenges. Although most of the tribes had submitted, some Britons saw Caesar's withdrawal as an opportunity to strike back. Bands of warriors harassed the Roman columns, launching hit-and-run attacks from the forests and hills. These assaults were not intended to drive the Romans out, but rather to demonstrate the Britons' continued defiance. Caesar, mindful of maintaining his forces' strength and discipline, ordered his soldiers to stay in formation and repel the attackers without deviating from their path. The legions, experienced in repelling guerrilla tactics, held their ground and pressed forward, determined to reach the safety of their ships. As the Romans neared the coast, Caesar received news that the weather was turning. The channel, calm during their arrival, was now churning with rough seas and strong winds. Caesar's fleet, anchored offshore, was vulnerable to the worsening conditions. The ships that had brought his legions to Britain were not built to withstand the violent autumn storms that swept across the channel. Caesar faced a new dilemma: the prospect of being stranded in Britain, exposed to both the unpredictable British weather and the possibility of renewed hostility from the local tribes. Caesar ordered his engineers to reinforce the ships, instructing them to make repairs and strengthen the vessels as much as possible. He also had the soldiers build temporary shelters along the coast, preparing for the possibility of an extended stay. The legions, disciplined and adaptable, set to work, constructing fortifications and gathering supplies from nearby settlements. Caesar knew that the longer they remained in Britain, the greater the risk of conflict with the Britons. The uneasy peace he had established could fracture at any moment, and his forces would be at a disadvantage if they were forced to defend their position against a coordinated British assault. Days passed as Caesar waited for the weather to improve. The Britons, observing the Romans from a distance, sensed an opportunity. Some tribes that had previously submitted began to gather warriors, preparing to test the Roman defences. Caesar's scouts reported signs of increased activity among the Britons, and he realized that his window of departure was closing. He issued orders to his soldiers, instructing them to remain vigilant and prepare for a potential attack. The situation was tense. The Romans, stranded on foreign shores, faced the prospect of a final confrontation before they could complete their withdrawal. Finally, the weather showed signs of improvement. Caesar seized the opportunity, ordering his legions to prepare for embarkation. The soldiers, relieved at the prospect of leaving Britain, quickly gathered their equipment and made their way to the ships. Caesar organized the departure carefully, ensuring that each unit boarded in an orderly fashion. As the Romans began to embark, however, the Britons launched a final assault. Bands of warriors emerged from the forests, charging down toward the coast with a flurry of spears and arrows. The Romans, though weary, met the attack with discipline and resolve. Caesar ordered his soldiers to form a defensive line along the beach, protecting the boarding process. The legionaries, shields interlocked, held their ground as the Britons pressed forward. The clash was fierce, with both sides exchanging blows as the Britons attempted to break through the Roman line. Caesar, positioned at the centre, directed his forces with precision, ensuring that the legions maintained their formation and repelled the attackers. Despite the intensity of the assault, the Britons were unable to breach the Roman defences. The discipline and cohesion of Caesar's legions proved decisive, allowing the Romans to hold their ground until the last of the soldiers had boarded the ships. As the final units withdrew, Caesar ordered the fleet to set sail, leaving the British shores behind. The Britons watched as the Roman ships disappeared over the horizon, their defiant cries fading into the distance.